I would like to welcome everyone to the Hennepin History Museum. My name is Jada Hansen. I'm the executive director here. I am excited to see so many people at our fireside chat. This is a program that runs October through May, and we solicit the program ideas from the community. And this is a wonderful example of a fireside chat that is also part of an exhibition in the hallway. I see a lot of our members today, and your membership and donors support this programming, and again, your feedback is welcome and encouraged. Right now you're sitting in the library of the George H. Christian Museum, or Mansion, excuse me, and this has been our home since 1958. George H. Christian made his wealth on patenting a process of milling spring wheat that put Minneapolis on the map as milling capital of the world for a full generation. Carolyn McKnight Christian would go on to inherit this home, and it was built from 1915 to 1920. She moved into it, and if you'll look at the exhibit in the hallway, you'll see that her mother was actually the president of the Minnesota League of Women Voters, one of the very first chapters. So it's a wonderful connection for us. We also have one more fireside chat program coming up on April 28th, and that is about Wonderland Amusement Park with Sue Hunter-Weir, who many of you may be familiar with. This is probably the second or third time she's talked about this topic here. It's always very, very popular. So I'm looking forward to this program we have this evening. I had the opportunity this past week to actually attend a Capitol Hill event. I went to Washington, D.C. with the American Association of Museums for Museums Advocacy Day, and had the chance to find out what this work is like and to affect the legislative process. So that's something that I thought was very timely for this organization to get to participate in. So with that, I turn it over to the League of Women Voters.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are gathered here today to highlight the journey of the Minneapolis League of Women Voters. Don't be fooled by some of the early leagues in the exhibition, early images. They may appear to be delicate ladies of leisure. However, under those marvelous hats beat the hearts of leaders who traveled to parts unknown, both literally and figuratively. As in any journey, we picked up souvenirs and met interesting traveling companions along the way. And now let's examine just a few of those. And let's see what lies inside the trunk.
Passing the torch.
Shortly after women won the right to vote, Edna McKnight Olson ran for alderwoman in North Minneapolis. She came from a family with ties back to the Mayflower, but married down, as they said then, to a Swedish immigrant carpenter. She had 2 preteen children and was active in the feisty Twin Cities union scene, or movement, labor union movement, excuse me. Despite a strong speaking voice and support from fellow radicals, she lost handily. Flash forward to the 1950s. Edna's youngest daughter, Pat, was married at 17. When her first child was 3, she and her husband moved to a new suburb. She didn't drive until many years later, but she made many friends in that new development. As her 2 children needed her attention less and less, she grew restless. She joined the PTA, she started the Friends of the Library, and became active in the League of Women Voters. She eventually served on city boards, served as the local expert on tax and transportation policy in her suburban area, and planned multiple fundraisers for the League and the library. Meanwhile, Pat's daughter went to college, worked, and bought her own house in Minneapolis. And in her early 30s, when she was planning to marry, she moved into a new neighborhood. Her mother suggested she attend the Minneapolis League's housing tour to get to know the city better. She also suggested joining the organization that had sparked her own journey into a happier life. The daughter thought her mother was crazy. Why would a young woman join this old institution? She finally joined the League so her mother would quit bugging her. Then one of her new neighbors called, and called again, and she's here today, offering to take her to a meeting. She was planning her wedding, working full-time, remodeling a house, and just didn't have time for this nonsense. But she went to the one meeting just to get it over with. The women at that unit meeting were smart, friendly, and courageous. She had a hard time going to sleep that evening after the first stimulating meeting. She eventually became chair of the housing tour, joined the board of the Minneapolis League, served as president, also joined the board of the Friends of the Minneapolis Library, and chaired the Minneapolis Arts Commission. To make this story better, she would have run for and won a seat on the city council. However, this is not a Hallmark movie, so. So instead, she is here today to remind you to ask all of your older relatives and friends the right questions. Find out what makes them tick and what the times were like that they lived in. Don't wait until it is too late to hear their stories. Honor the unfulfilled dreams of your grandmothers and the courage of your mothers. Pass along the important history of the things that matter to the next generation. I want to thank you, Mom and Grandma.
Mary Lou Hill and the League stand on the forefront of issues.
As a League member since 1951, Mary Lou Hill has been a leader in so many ways over the years that she can truly be called one of our most active members. She held board positions, led studies, and was executive secretary in the office for 4 years during the 60s. But most of all, she liked following and observing the work of elected representatives of city and state government. She graduated from the U of M with a degree in political science and was very interested in government. She and friend Mary McGee were actively involved in the League's Observer Corps. They attended and observed numerous meetings of the Minneapolis City Council, the Park Board, and legislative committees at the state capitol. As Mary Lou said, it seemed like we were always driving together to some meeting. We were also the first observers of the regional boards that became the Metropolitan Council. Mary Lou served on LWV Minnesota's Action Committee for 9 years and lobbied for health care reform at the Capitol. I think we're still doing that. And last year, at age 95, she testified at the Capitol against the proposed voter ID amendment. In all of her 60-plus years of activism for the League, her favorite and most lasting memory is of an experience when she was just beginning her lifelong journey with the League of Women Voters. It was 1954, and she was a delegate to the National Convention in Denver. This was a 5-day convention, and the train trip across the country took a day and a half with a stop to change trains in Omaha, Nebraska. It was no small commitment for a busy mother of 3 children to be away from her family for 9 days. She traveled alone, but soon found there were League members from other parts of the country sharing the long train ride to Denver, so new friendships were formed even before she arrived at the convention. In fact, Mary Lou says the best part of her experience was getting to know so many other women who were interested in the current issues and policy decisions of government. I was inspired listening to so many intelligent women at that convention speaking on the resolutions. The delegates at the convention reaffirmed the League's unqualified support of the United Nations, one of Mary Lou's enduring interests. She also remembers the intense interest there was in the Joseph McCarthy hearings televised live. She remembers the shared outrage as hundreds of fellow League members crowded around the only TV in the hotel lobby to listen to the proceedings. Overall, it was an exciting experience that made her proud to be a member of the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters has always been in the forefront on issues, she says. Asked her advice to younger women about joining the League, Mary Lou says, active involvement enriches your own background and knowledge. Get in and get involved, and good things happen. And it must keep you young, too, because Mary Lou is an example of that.
The League of Women Voters moderates a prickly debate at the Capri Theater.
Minneapolis League organized a debate for the Ward 5 City Council candidates at the Capri Theater 4 years ago. Due to redistricting, 2 previously elected council members were vying for the position along with other community activists. The emotions ran high, and supporters did not always follow the rules to remain quiet during the Q&A. Our experienced moderator helped keep a lid on things, and everyone was treated with respect and fairness. This is an example of what we do. Sometimes we help other groups, usually neighborhood organizations, plan candidate forums and provide the moderators, timekeepers, and question sorters. It isn't always easy. Just last fall, we came close to having one candidate pull out of a forum when her supporters weren't allowed to wear their campaign t-shirts at the forum. This despite that the candidate had received written rules beforehand disallowing electioneering in the forum hall. We currently have a cadre of a dozen trained moderators, attesting to our belief that the provision of candidate forums continues to be a core service of the League.
League juvenile justice recommendations put children first.
During the 1970s and 80s, the League focused a lot of attention on the police, courts, and criminal justice. League President Diana Murphy, who went on to become a federal judge, encouraged our membership to study the juvenile court. The comprehensive series of studies that followed proved that delivering justice to juveniles needed to involve the whole justice system, not just the courts. A Minneapolis League forum brought together for the first time players from all sectors to address the problem. We were very timely in '72 and '73, precursors to looking at the whole system. Many of our recommendations were included in national legislation in 1974, establishing a system that put children first and the offense second. The Minneapolis Police Department used the studies as a resource to teach crime and justice in the public schools. By observing in municipal court each day for 18 months, Minneapolis Leaguers studied minority sentencing practices in 1977 and '78. We made recommendations to the bench and served on a task force established by the judges to effect change. This project proved to be a great learning experience for the volunteers as well. New observers were always invited into a judge's chambers to get his or her perspective, not necessarily the reality, on how the system was treating minority defendants. Leaguers were included in discussions with prosecutors, public defenders, probation officers, and other court personnel. After observing a succession of mayors treat the position of police chief as a political reward for a loyal campaigner, the League successfully lobbied for a charter change to create a more professional, specific term of office for the chief. As a follow-up to a study on family violence, the League focused on handguns. When NRA member and activist Wendy Rudman joined the League and was elected to co-chair the study committee with Connie Cameron, the meetings were never dull. Research was thorough and positions were hard-fought. Wendy issued a minority report. A well-publicized briefing with St. Paul Police Chief McCracken debating Wendy Rudman was electric. Members adopted a strong consensus, particularly on allowing a local municipality to enact stricter handgun measures than that of the state. Unfortunately, an effort to get local leagues throughout Minnesota to concur with this position failed. In 1985, the state legislature passed such a prohibition. It wasn't until 1990 that a Minnesota League study on handguns supported all of the Minneapolis positions. Ann Jade, chair of the Juvenile Justice Studies, is an example of one of the many leaguers who became knowledgeable and passionate about an issue while volunteering for the League, which in turn led to a career in the field. In Ann Jade's case, many years in criminal justice planning and policy making in state government. Minneapolis Leaguers served on many boards and committees addressing the courts and the justice system, and sponsored judicial forums with Watch and the Hennepin County Bar Association. Dottie Spidell, Ann Jade, and Polly Keppel all have served as board members for Operation De Novo, a Hennepin County court diversion program, after developing expertise in different aspects of the criminal justice system. I am starting my 30th year on the De Novo board in the position still known as, quote, the League of Women Voters, unquote, seat.
Creativity wins for election judges.
For a period of time, Leaguers trained election judges for the Minneapolis election office. Our challenge was to train hundreds of judges in a dark theater in the downtown library, keeping them engaged and awake. We creatively introduced them to the minutiae of election law changes with live theater. We recruited friends, children, and acquaintances to perform skits demonstrating election night procedures with costumes, heralds blowing horns, and other memorable gimmicks. Live performances were followed by small group hands-on demonstrations with the old black levered voting machines. Demos included tips on removing the often stuck paper rolls for write-ins. The live performances were eventually videotaped to allow more flexibility to schedule training and a better hands-on experience, particularly when the vote scan machines were introduced. Leaguers were also employed by the city as election day troubleshooters and absentee vote deliverers. We met at City Hall, were deputized and fanned out across town to drop off freshly arrived absentee votes at precincts, answer questions from the election judges, and call for technical help when needed.
Well-oiled operation keeps democracy on task.
For more than 40 years, the Minneapolis League has participated in an election returns project, earning us visibility in the community and considerable revenue. In the early years, we provided the eyes and ears for the media in more than 400 precincts around Hennepin County for federal elections and Minneapolis precincts in city elections. Volunteers arrived at an assigned precinct at poll closing time and reported the results to election headquarters. Before cell phones, we often depended on pay phones. Remember those? Our instructions advised us to bring quarters. At a last resort, we called when we got home. As election judges rattled off totals from the old black levered machines, Leaguers added up the numbers and the media anxiously awaited for results at League headquarters. We set up election headquarters wherever we were offered space and adding machines. The old Donaldson's department store, First Bank's downtown lobby, a Bloomington office tower, Control Data's earth-sheltered training center near the Dome, and eventually the property tax department at Hennepin County. It was a well-oiled operation. League phone operators took calls from the field. Teenage runners delivered reporting sheets to those calculating a race. And the League president wrote the new totals on a whiteboard in the media room, where reps from CCO Radio or Minneapolis Star Trib or Channel 5 would call their editors. It was hectic and it was fun. 1983, our first year using a computer program to tally returns, and it crashed. Being Leaguers, we were resourceful and made a quick switch that night to pocket calculators. In future years, our equipment improved along with our computer skills. With the advent of the vote scan machines providing a disk of results readable at city and county election offices, our media pool members turned to them for results instead. The first year, all 140 precinct head judges arrived at City Hall at approximately the same time to deliver the results discs. This caused a major traffic jam for blocks around City Hall. The Minneapolis election officials were desperate. The League then suggested a different kind of service we could offer. Drop-off and delivery at selected precinct within each ward. Then the Leaguers traveled to City Hall. Only 13 cars. We still do this, but travel to the election department warehouse in northeast Minneapolis instead of downtown. Results are electronically transmitted to City Hall. We handle everything else, from ballots to same-day registration forms to American flags. We are fortunate to have more than 75 volunteers from the League, their families, and friends, who year after year make this project so successful.
A report on one financial angel.
Many women have contributed to the strength and success of the League. Among them is Florence, better known as Flory Gray. She has left us a sustaining legacy. Flory joined League in 1948, was involved in all levels of the organization, and elected the League of Minneapolis president and the League of Minnesota vice president in the 1960s. After retiring from her job, she resumed her active role in LWV Minneapolis by leading the self-study and the 75th anniversary campaign in 1992. The campaign was so successful that LWV Minneapolis established an endowment at the Minneapolis Foundation. This foundation is part of our funding today. Flory was recognized for her work for the League in 1994 with the Best Menard Award. Fran Paolo said in nominating Flory, she was always a strong, insightful leader who inspired the support of volunteers and with their help achieved ambitious goals. Rosemary Booth added, Flory was unflappable. When things didn't work out, she did what she had to be done and then shrugged it off. No postmortems, no regrets. We worked hard, but we also had lots of laughs. Often Flory's children were encouraged to help in the office by collating, copying, delivering materials, and assisting with election returns. Rosemary recounts one occasion when the children and Flory's were helping to assemble the first Council of Metropolitan League study. The children made paper airplanes out of some of the extra papers and flew them out the window onto the Nicollet Mall. Written on the planes, help, we are being held prisoners by the League of Women Voters. Flory sustained a financial support for LWV in another way. When she died, her family created a legacy fund in memory of her. The fund supports membership and development and supplements dues for those who need it. This fund continues to be an important tool of the League Minneapolis today.
League of Women Voters Minneapolis projects have surprising results.
In 1994, when Minneapolis developed the Neighborhood Revitalization Program, known as NRP, League members were trained as neighborhood facilitators. We helped neighborhoods develop policies, bylaws, and election rules. Residents trusted the League to be fair and open to their points of view. We're still called upon by neighborhood organizations to assist and certify their elections. This is now called the LWVMpls Neighborhood Elections Program. League volunteers also developed the procedures for NRP city elections, where delegates were selected to sit on the NRP policy board. For many years, we managed this process. And when NRP changed into the Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission, NCEC, our volunteers helped set up that delegate process also. But there is more to the story. In 2010, the League of Women Voters developed the Student Ambassador Program at Minneapolis Community and Technical College to teach the skills of democracy to the students. Last July, I represented the Minneapolis League at the Neighborhood Community Engagement election. I explained the rules and reviewed and confirmed the election results. At the end of the meeting, a young Somali man handed me a note written on a piece of notebook paper. I thought it was a complaint challenging the delegate selection process that I had led. Instead, it was a thank you note to the League of Women Voters Minneapolis for teaching him the skills to get involved in his community. He had been one of the student ambassadors.
League of Women Voters Minneapolis blazes trail to safe, affordable housing.
The Minneapolis League's been involved in housing since the 1940s, with 14 studies on some aspect of housing since 1965 alone. Much of the attention has been focused on affordable housing. A strong housing committee with leadership from Harriet Johnson, Helen Rosicki, and during the 90s and 2000, Mary Lou Loud, brought League into a coalition with nonprofit developers, housing advocates, faith community efforts, and affordable housing advocates on the City Council to create more quality, affordable housing. With several agencies led by the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, or MICA, they asked the League to support an affordable housing trust fund, but the League had no positions on trust funds. A quick study was done through 2 voter articles and unit discussions. Consensus was reached to support this trust fund, which was passed by the City Council in January of 2003. The League educated its members and others on housing issues and has taken action over the years armed with our many housing positions. Leaguer Monica Nilsson, an advocate for the homeless at St. Stephen's Human Services, has been a valuable resource in our understanding of the problem of homelessness. This includes raising awareness by touring homeless shelters. Voter newsletter articles about the 18-year-old boy who aged out of foster care and is now on the streets, and the suburban teenage girl who ran away from an abusive stepfather and an intolerable home situation, gave the homeless youth crisis a name and a face. Housing issues the League studied and acted on over the years remain relevant today.
League opens the door to innovative housing in the city.
In 1979, the League began its annual housing tours, showcasing housing opportunities in Minneapolis. Some of you remember them, I see. The tours, open to the public, brought from 50 to 150 people on 2 days in May to a variety of innovative housing, often in places in the city where they might not be familiar. Tours included rehabs on Nicollet Island, Habitat for Humanity houses in North Minneapolis, condo conversions in Kenwood, and new low-income housing developed with public-private partnerships, such as Brighton Development and the Central Community Housing Trust, now known as AON. We saw a geodesic dome house, earth-sheltered townhouses along Interstate Highway 94, pioneering development along the river at the Itasca warehouse, where at that time no one was living. The Van Dusen Mansion, before its rehab, and years later in its glory as an event center. We were introduced to new affordable housing on old school sites and rehab singles units for low-income working folks in historic structures on the fringes of downtown. League guides on the buses provided background on the neighborhoods and told the participants what they would be seeing. They educated us about emerging trends in Minneapolis housing, coordinating 150 people on 3 buses, moving through a half a dozen locations, stopping for lunch, and returning to Painter Park was sometimes daunting, but fun. And as one of the guides, I can say we sometimes almost lost a few of our. As the city of Minneapolis became more proactive about highlighting city living, it set up its own tour and asked the League to provide volunteers to help at each site. And that has grown to become the Minneapolis-St. Paul Home Tour. We assisted as tour guides and eventually discontinued our own housing tours. We are happy to pass on another great idea to the city, however.
Special education action gives lift to families.
As an elementary school teacher, Paula Goldberg was interested in special needs students. When the League decided to study special education in Minneapolis in the early 70s, Barbara Flanagan asked Paula to chair the studies. Kay Kessel was a special education teacher and served on that committee. Following the studies, Paula and members of the committee got involved in efforts to educate and support parents of special needs students. The study revealed that parents of children with disabilities needed more rights and resources. Polly Edmonds of LWV Minneapolis helped with the first fundraiser. With $2,000, they started a volunteer organization that became PACER, a Minnesota parent training and information center funded by the U.S. Department of Education. Paula met Marge Goldberg, a lobbyist for the Learning Disability Association. Their first conference was for kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities. They helped PACER grow to a nationally known organization. Today, PACER is a Center for National Parent Network National Bullying Prevention Center, Minnesota Parent Training and Information Center, Assistive Technology, F2F Health Information Center. Many of the people on Paula's committee and experts recognized by the studies are still connected with PACER. Paula is recognized nationally for her advocacy for special education, and when one of her sons, a successful businessman, was interviewed in the New York Times, he credited his mother, a model entrepreneur, for his success.
The shadows in the middle of middle school achievement.
I can read it.
Okay. Step up.
There were two middle school achievement projects, a portrait of our Minneapolis public middle schools and recommendations for improvements in 1998, and a continued look at our Minneapolis public middle schools in October 2000. The League was asked to help in a shadow study in the Minneapolis public schools with major funding provided by the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation. Catherine Shreves had been president of the Minneapolis League in the early 90s. At the time of this project, her children were in elementary school and her son was a year away from middle school. She sought a way to be involved in education achievement issues facing the Minneapolis public schools, and the schools wanted parents involved. Catherine, Peggy Plummer, and Susan Gray led a group of over 100 volunteers to go to all the middle schools and shadow the administrators, teachers, and support staff. Education researchers from the University of Tucson led the study. As a result of this effort, Minneapolis School Superintendent Carol Johnson directed that there be a standardized model for all middle schools. Curriculums were developed and teachers were required to have middle school certification. Catherine said it was an honor and a huge responsibility to be part of the $200,000 grant. In 1999, Catherine was elected to the school board for a 3-year term. She continues her work with education achievement issues through League and as a Minneapolis Foundation board member.
Alternative education gets parents back to school.
Former longtime school board member Judy Farmer said, "I have always believed the League contributed more to my work in public education than I contributed to League." In the mid-1970s, our very active education committee, led by Peggy Plummer and Susan Gray, undertook a comprehensive examination of alternative education programs, the earliest iterations of what we now know as choices. In Minneapolis from 1971 to 1975, the federal government funded the experimental Southeast Alternatives, where parents in Southeast Minneapolis could choose from contemporary, continuous progress, open school, or a K-12 free school. This experiment was the first test of choices, but it was also a desegregation tool. The success of the program led to spreading the choices to other areas in the city. From working on that education study, Judy learned the value of being thorough, asking probing questions, navigating a complex bureaucracy by developing open relationships, and objectivity in analyzing data and drafting recommendations. These are hallmarks of League efforts and the bedrock of respect enjoyed by the League at city, state, and national levels. During Judy's service in the Minneapolis Public School Board, she tried to incorporate these elements in her work and earned a reputation for asking questions and requesting information on issues. The League's work has been extremely useful to the school board and the administration. When the board and superintendent really wanted to know about an issue or get information out about a topic they themselves could not seek because of political or educational sensitivities, they could suggest to the League that a study would be very helpful. The Minneapolis League's Education Committee was extremely active and valuable during the time when most of the Minneapolis League's members were parents of school-aged children. As those members have aged, public education has less personal urgency. However, we are still hosting breakfast with the superintendent and school board as a chance to discuss issues, and recently sponsored a series of forums focused on teaching, learning, and contract issues. Our membership could use more enthusiastic young parent members to infuse the urgency that current public education topics deserve.
Voting rights count on us. Since our founding 93 years ago, the League of Women Voters has fought to ensure that our elections are fair, free, and accessible to all eligible citizens. When a bill to require a government-issued photo ID in order to vote was introduced in 2011, we immediately recognized it as a threat to the voting rights of qualified citizens, and it became our top priority. After the bill to amend the state constitution passed in April of 2012, in spite of all of our efforts, the campaign to defeat the amendment began. Among the highlights of the struggle against this amendment was the opportunity for several League of Women Voters members to speak to a variety of groups across the state, and for local League of Women Voters groups to develop their own educational programs on the subject. The greatest obstacle to deal with was a lie that many Minnesotans probably still believe. It is simply not true to say that Minnesota elections are beset by fraud. It is simply not true, the organization trumpeting this lie announced last year that there were almost 140 convictions for illegal voting after the 2010 election. That is out of almost 3 million votes cast, a rate of 0.0047%, or 47/10,000th of 1%. Virtually all of these convictions were felons voting while still on probation. A photo ID would not have prevented a single illegal vote. In the end, rather than defeating the lie, we highlighted the amendment language that jeopardized absentee balloting, among other things. We pointed to groups that would be disenfranchised and explained why. And with the help of county officials, we made clear the high cost to local governments of implementing a law based on the amendment. And the amendment was defeated. Photo ID laws have been called the modern-day Jim Crow laws. The goal of these laws is to suppress the vote. The importance of defeating this amendment for all Minnesotans cannot be exaggerated, for it leaves open the path to the voting booth for all qualified Minnesota citizens.
Rubber stamp. Is there a stamp in there?
Better way to run for city government.
Better ways to run city government. The discussion that led to two studies, Minneapolis Government, a Balancing Act, and a Balancing Act 2, started in 2003. A league committee had already developed a study on Minneapolis government finance, looking at the city's budget, debt, and cuts required by the state deficit. Positions on property taxes and an examination of the Minneapolis Community Development Agency were also part of that mix. Then someone on the Finance Committee, which included Nancy Witta, Mary Lou Hill, Ann Duff, and others said, "You know what we need to do next? A study of Minneapolis government structure." Joan Nemec, then Minneapolis League president, offered to chair the committee. The time was right. The current government structure was confusing, with staff reporting too many bosses. Star Tribune reporter Jim Boyd wrote about changes needed in city government. There were new members on the city council and a new mayor, R.T. Ryback. Another factor was the declining population in Minneapolis and criticism that there was too much government for this decreased population. Surveys showed satisfaction in city government had gone down. Many former officials and city employees agreed that at least some of the inefficiencies in city government were caused by the structure. Lyle Schwarzkopf, a former city coordinator, spoke at public hearings of a need for changes. The highlights of working on two city government studies were many. First, the study itself, untangling how city government really worked, how independent boards worked, and the possibility of a city administrator role, and looking at what could make it better. And then, the members of the League Committee were talented and dedicated to the project. Pat Koval-Jarbo and Jean Andre are listed as writers, and Martha Allen as the editor. Committee members were able to secure grants to fund researchers and pay for printing. Financial support was given from the University of Minnesota Center for Urban and Regional Affairs and Medtronic. But obstacles became apparent as the studies progressed. Subjects were complex, too big. There was resistance to change. Some wanted things to stay the same to maintain power positions. League members were divided on how to best develop recommendations and to move ahead. A strong plus to these two studies is their relevance today. There is now a strong city task force composed of 12 former elected leaders with staff to publicize city government's cumbersome structure, to make recommendations and advocate change to the city charter to reflect these recommendations. However, at this time, there has not been support from Minneapolis elected officials or city charter commissioners, but things might change.
As you can see, our methods of communicating and marking our progress has changed along the route, but our message always gets through. Our league travelers encountered unexplored territory, restless natives, and resistant tour operators. But over the years, their dedicated explorers rolled with the punches, adjusted their itinerary, and pressed ahead. Thank you for joining us today for the Fireside Chat. As you have heard, we looked at problems in our community and we tackled them straight on. League of Women Voters has helped to shape Hennepin County. We are still here and we still have the fire. Thank you so much. We'd like to recognize all the people who took part in preparing the information that you heard today, and some of them are with us today. And if you are, as I read your name, would you wave or stand up so that we can thank you? And they would be happy to talk with you further after the program. So if you identify somebody that you'd like to learn more about, that would be great. So the people that contributed memories were passing the torch, Deborah Jindra, Mary Lou Hill, interviewed by Sally Punt, Mary Lou. Candidate forms, Margaret Berg, I know Margaret is here. Criminal Justice, Ann Jade, and Polly Keppel. And Election Judge Training, Janet Mitbo, and Polly Keppel. And Election Returns, also the same dynamic duo, Janet and Polly. Tori Gray, Susan Gray, Susan, welcome, and Alice Mormon. And in addition, neighborhood elections in the NRP, also Alice. Housing issues, Mary Lou Loud. Mary Lou could not be here today, but she has been our housing person for a long time, has a lot of knowledge, a wonderful advocate, and Polly Keppel. And the housing tours, again, Janet, our logistics person, from the word go. And education, Judy Farmer, and Paula Goldberg and Catherine Shreves were interviewed by Kay Kessel for this part of the program. And city government, a balancing act, Joan Nemick, Pat Koval-Jarbo, Pat here. That's who you are. And they were also interviewed by Kate Donahue, and the photo ID amendment and the League of Women Voters of Minnesota, and that's Gwen Myers, who's a Minneapolis and a Minnesota leaguer. So those are some of the people who helped to bring this forward today, but I also want to say that not just today, but for 20, 30, 40 years, these people have been engaged in the community and making Minneapolis a better place in ways that people don't often know about. So this is a wonderful opportunity to us to bring forward some of the unsung heroines that have helped to make Minneapolis the wonderful city that it is today. So thanks to all of you for coming. And if you are not a member of the League of Women Voters and this has enticed you into wanting to become one, we have a sign-in sheet. You can put your name and contact information here, and someone will get in touch with you about becoming a part of this dynamic group.
And men can be members also.
Oh, yes. Again, and I see there are some cookies and there is some coffee still remaining, and there's plenty of time to chat with our performers as well as our authors.
And I'd like to invite everyone to stay at the museum as well. We're open until 5. There are 3 galleries upstairs and 1 down here. So stay, sign up for the league, and tour the museum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's rough.